Cool. Well, Ka, could you tell us a little bit about your musical background and how you got where you are now?
Sure. So it's a loaded question. I feel like the short answer I always say is, well, I've just been persisting in this folly for, you know, well, my whole life, but maybe specifically writing like my own music for 26 years or something like this. And maybe even further back than that. My I did as a kid take piano lessons and played flute in the band. Came from a pretty musical family. My parents are not artistic. They were both scientists. But I still had a lot of music. My uncle and aunt are both musicians. My grandparents were both musicians, not by career, but they both sang in the choir. And so anyway, there was a lot of like musical things going on. And um, as soon as I started taking piano lessons, I was like, you know, taking the melody that was, on the sheet music and adding lyrics to it. So that goes back all the way to like when I was like 8 or something like this and playing songs at like family gatherings and stuff like that. Um, but anyway, it's a really loaded question. I mean, I when I was in high school, I guess I started to um get interested in music and like alternative music. More like I was born in Decatur, Illinois. So that's not a big city. And so influences were like a little slow coming there in terms of like how I was getting musical information. And as I said, my parents were not really um did not really provide me with a whole lot of musical influences. So it was about like meeting the right people and um which I did. And my friend Tara Lee, who was then a collaborator of mine, we went to high school together. We ran cross country together and are still best friends today. Um, Started listening to a lot of music. She had a Sassy subscription magazine back in the day. This was like in the 90s, early 90s. And they would put these mixtapes out. You can like look it up. And they would send you a tape in the mail, and it would, be like a collection of random artists. And I think on one there was like the like early throwing muses and like the slits and maybe like Bikini Kill or something. And I don't know. I and so we that was kind of like our passageway into like what we were like kind of interested at the time, which was um post punk, I guess, music. And started a band when I was 18 with a couple other friends, which we called Vicky's Box, which was named after a throwing music song in their self-titled record. And then that band kind of moved to Champaign, Illinois, where I went to school for my first year of college. And we started a band called Palmolive, which was named after the drummer from the Raincoats and the Slits. Both of these bands were um, experiments. Like we all, well, some of us had some kind of musical background, but we were kind of all learning guitar together and learning drums together and playing bass together. And it was a purely, it came from just a folk tradition of just getting in there and doing it. And it was a way of socializing and a way of just spending time, which is still like a great way to spend time with people, is creating things. And anyway, so that was like the first, these two bands, Palmolive and Vicky's Box, were the first two musical projects. And then I'd say and those were both pretty short lived and rather chaotic projects. Like I think we were more into the idea of being in a band than actually being in a band. So it was like it was formative in a way, and it was like a time for us to dream and like what could be we what do we want to be, but we mostly were just listening to music and imagining. And so the first music project that started in earnest was, fast forward a few years, and it was in Chicago. And I started playing music with Tara Lee and Georgia. And that was kind of the beginning of Spires of the Sunset Rise, which was a band that I was involved in from 2001, basically until very recently. And even we're not even like officially broken up as a band. We still keep it as like an open possibility. But the Spires and Sunset Rise, that band was birthed sort of in the thick of sort of like the freak folk scene, which was really big in the knots and or in the aughts, sorry, not the knots, the aughts. And those were like Pelt and Espers and Josephine Foster and Devender Bonhart and like that sort of thing, Vetiver, Six Organs of Admittance, these sorts of bands and influences, Tower Recordings, even though they sort of like pre that a bit. And so we kind of took those like punk leanings and then put them more into a structure, put them more into a folk, more of like a folk container, but using, I guess we call it psychedelic folk, using a lot of various some mild effects, nothing crazy, but we had some pedals, but we were just very into like acoustic instruments specifically. So we were playing acoustic guitars and acoustic zithers and cello. Tara started learning the cello, mandolins, embiras, spike fiddles. We were kind of into collecting instruments and things we found or things that were given to us, but we were interested at that point in really exploring instrumentation and different types of tuning and different types of escaping the rules, basically. And again, Tara and I had a bit of a musical background, but nothing, in a conservatory type of thing. And then Georgia was completely self educated musically, and Tracy, her sister, Tara Lee's sister, also self-taught. And so it was an exploratory time, and we were very active in the Chicago scene from like 2003 until I moved from Chicago, and I think 2008 I moved to Madison, but the band continued after that. I think the pinnacle of the Spires career was we opened up for the Incredible String Band for a few shows. They did a run. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's kind of seminal folk band from the UK, but they came in maybe 2007, maybe earlier, 2005. I do apologize in advance. I'm not great with dates. And they did a series of shows all over the US, and then they would have different openers. And so like Joanna Newsom was one of them, Espers was one of them, Josephine Foster was one of them, and Spires and the Sunset Rise for a couple of them. I think that the Spires, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Spires music, but yeah, I mean, it has a lot of different sounds. It's hard to really totally define what the sound was, but we really at least started out as a very, kind of a witchy, sort of wild project. We got the witchy thing a lot, and that actually continues to this day, which we could talk about more if you want. And we were very weird. We were very freaky, like truly freak folky. So anyway, then fast forward, I was in Madison, Tara Lee and I continued. You knew this was going to be a long answer. That is not an easy answer. That's a long, when you're 40, blah, 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 it's going to be a long answer. So so Spires did continue when we moved to Madison. Tara Lee actually also moved to Madison, so that's how good of friends we are. And we basically continued just the two of us. The band kind of kept getting smaller and smaller, and so the last few records are just me and Tara Lee. And so maybe in 2012, I'm going to say, maybe 2013, we started collaborating with a drummer in Chicago, Michael Zarang, who is a very, He's an amazing jazz drummer, if you're not familiar. Has been playing music for decades, and is a legend. He's a legend. Michael Zerang, right there with Hamid Drake. And that kind of opened us up, because we were interested not in like writing songs with him per se. We were interested in exploring improvisation. And so, there was always elements of improvisation in Spires. There were moments of improvisation. It always came from a folkloric sort of approach. There was never reading music per se. But it was pretty composed, Spires music, even though some people don't they don't think so, but it actually was very composed. Whereas, yeah, I think at one point we were like, we really wanted to explore the idea of free improvisation. And so we did a residency with Michael at Experimental Sound Studio in Chicago, I think, yeah, somewhere again in the window of 2012, 2013. I hope I'm right with this. It might have been 2011. And we spent a week there just jamming. And I feel like that, although I feel like I've always been like a fairly like, what am I trying to say? I'm an embodied performer or whatever. I feel like that really opened things up in terms of just what performance is and what performance can be, and like finding an improvisatory voice that's maybe not like the cookie cutter approach to it or something like this. And so that kind of added an improvisatory period for Spires where we did a lot of improvisation. And that was right again when I started moving to New York. And again, this whole time I haven't even mentioned an instrument, because I've always been a multi-instrumentalist, even though I kind of don't like that term. I played so many different instruments and Spires, and there was not one that I played more than the other. I played harmonium, I played guitar, I did voice, I played drums, I played spike fiddle, and so that ethos kind of continued. Although I feel like recently it's been a little more targeted, but in that free improvisation period is when I started playing the flute more, and I busted my flute out from when I was, because that came into Spires a little bit, but not only towards like the improvisation period for the most part. And then that became a big instrument of mine in improvisation as well as voice. And so then, yeah, I think, then it became just a moving to New York, getting involved in the improvisation scene here, but then also moving to New York, then honed in my solo project, which then was an amalgamation of, all of that experience with like folk instruments, post-punk influences, but then on top of that, like all of the influences that New York had given me and already had given me, but New York just reinforced that in terms of like the minimalism and the electronics, and sort of a hybrid way of making music. And which is why it's so hard sometimes to summarize this process of like where I am now. And I mean, when I do play a set now, which now has gone more into even like an interdisciplinary sort of approach, where it's almost more like a dance or a movement piece, or just incredibly physical. That's obviously all these things have added to it, but I think now when people are like, how did you get here? And again, it's like I persist in my folly, and I'm at the point now where I'm just trying to destroy music.
So, how would you define witchy?
Oh, okay.
I want to go there for a moment.
Sure. I mean, I think that that's a word that's been certainly reclaimed in the last 15 years, and more than that perhaps. And it's a word that's always been imposed on me. It's never one that I've necessarily, it's not on my website. I'm a witch or anything like that. It's definitely a label that people have put on me. And I think it comes from my performance style. it's a very embodied performance style. It's a very it's almost one where I'm like conjuring things. There's something almost religious about it that people feel, because it is so intense, and it's so, I like to think of it as like this hyper now type of approach to performance, and particularly to music, which has gotten even more accentuated in the last like 4 years, 3 years, I would say, for sure. Um, but again, they did that in the Spires too. And I think it was, you know, I think it's like sometimes people say witch when it's unfamiliar, or it feels a little uncomfortable, or it feels like a little too wild and a little too feminine or something like this. Um, so I think it's a powerful word. And I think when the Spires first started getting called that, I think I had some like knee jerk reaction to it. Didn't like it, but now I'm fine with it. You can call me witch if you want.
At what point in this process did you start thinking about the microphone as an instrument, and what does it mean to you to be a microphonist?
Yeah, I noticed that question. Well, that's a very recent term that I very recently sort of coined, and it's probably already been coined. Honestly, I don't know, but um, yeah. So this most recent project that I did, um, it was a show in Chicago, um, for Lampo, and it was a very special commission that I did in a room, a tiny room. It was their office space in this old building in downtown Chicago, on like the one of the oldest buildings in Chicago. You could see the prison right out the windows. And anyway, it was a special thing. I think they were doing it before COVID actually, but it worked really well during COVID, and this was sort of towards the end of it. And it was multiple performances with very small audience members. So um I think I did 6 pieces 2 nights I did this 25-minute performance 6 times in a row, um two nights in a row. So it was like a total of 12 performances. And I was experimenting with the number of audience members for each one. So each night I would start with my first performance was 25 minutes, and I performed it for one person. The second for two, the third for three, and the last two for four, I believe. And it was such a incredible experience, actually. I mean, obviously it's not very inclusive, not many people could come, but it was a very special way of relating to what a performance is. And obviously those people who did have tickets had a very special experience. But anyway, so the reason I bring this up is because for that particular experience, I had been exploring a lot of like microphone techniques over the years, but that piece in particular, I got way, way deeper into it. And supposed to like looking at a microphone as an instrument in and of itself that you can use as a mallet, you can use as a like way to create textures, a microphone to uh perform, I mean, to use as like a baton that you don't even know, like, I mean, to drag to, um it's not just simply an amplifier, it's more than that. And um and so yeah, creating that by either, obviously movement is very important to that, but also then having it be a trigger for various things, that would be, run through some kind of computer program, or possibly some kind of just pedal, or even not. And I think, yeah, like they're like, and then and then the sound is created by the motion of by the motion of the microphone. um and this is a new term. Again, I don't think I've even officially, I think I did maybe mention on Instagram or something, but I've never like officially put that in my bio or anything yet. But but it seems like it makes sense. Like if you've seen recent performances of mine, The microphone is more than just something I sing into. It's going under my jacket. It's going behind me. I'm making a sound by hitting my ass, with it. All these things.
How do you go about selecting a microphone? I mean, you talked about some of the ways that you sort of develop a vocabulary using it. Is it totally experimental? I mean, what are some of the ways that you're thinking about developing that vocabulary in an improvisational format moving
Sure.
forward with it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm just starting that process. So I think I'd have a way better answer in like a couple of years. But yeah, I mean, I started using more like I bought like a shotgun microphone, and I started doing like outdoor field recording, sort of like out there in the environment, and almost like creating like microphone dances with it that maybe had elements of my voice in it, but was capturing ambient sounds, where there'd be like maybe a fountain in the distance. It was creating this sort of like white noise. So I'd have the shotgun microphone that I would just sort of like whiz past it, it would catch it, then go back, whiz, catch it again, and then come back over. And maybe you get my voice for a second. Oh, there's some like ducks behind me, catching that. Because I feel like, microphones are so often thought of as static things. You put them in a stand, or you put it in that fancy thing to make sure that, it doesn't move, So I guess I'm playing with that idea of all these parts are moving, the captured, the capturee and the captured are both just the capturer, the capturee. We're all moving parts.
Can you talk a little bit more about the physicality of your work and when and maybe there's no, you can't pinpoint a time when this happened, but has that always been a primary focus of your music making, or is that more recent?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the way it is now is more recent. I think from the very beginning, I was always I would get very lost in the music and have certain sort of performative elements even when I started, but it's been a process for sure. When Spires first started playing music, I kind of hated it. I hated performing. I was very, very nervous. I would get very overwhelmed and kind of just like it was torture or something to perform. I was very shy in my 20s. So, I think at one point I realized like, there was like, yeah, there was like a dragon waiting to get out or something. I needed to move my body to I needed to free myself, and that somehow I found, I think primarily, yeah, when we started doing more of the improvisation stuff, I was like, something kind of loosened up, something certainly loosened up physically. And I mean, when I first moved to New York, in fact, probably when you saw me in Cleveland play, I was sitting in a chair, probably. No? Oh, good.
You were
Okay, cool.
flailing all about.
Oh, shit. Okay.
I was like transfixed for like those 25 minutes or whatever.
Amazing. So cool. Okay. Well, that was probably right when I just started standing, quite frankly, because I put out my first solo record, Sob Republic Picnic through Drag City in 2017. And I was going on tour with my friend Haley's band, Circuit du You. Circuit du You. And I remember the first set we played in Detroit. I sat. And then the next show, I forget where it was. Maybe it was in Canada. I was just like, I don't think I'm gonna sit. And that seemed like a big decision. That was a big, I don't know. There's something secure because I think some of my friends would be like, you're like convulsing in the chair. Like, why don't you just stand the F up? Just free yourself. And I do. I think the chair was definitely like a security blanket and like a way to contain it. And then, yeah, once that chair went away, it did not come back. And then that just, yeah, that freed up a lot of space. And that was really when the work took on a whole nother dimension in terms of embodiment, for sure. And it was like, it's a, I mean, I think there are definitely performative elements in my movement that I'm aware of, but I think for the most part, and what I primarily am doing is this movement is just really, it's part of the sound often, like it's related to the sound, and it's me deep in the sound, and it's mostly like a very natural kind of thing that I become very like in tune with and in touch with. I can watch a performance and be like, oh yeah, okay, maybe that part was, I knew what I was doing. I was performing there a little bit. And then other parts are like, okay, yeah, you're just totally in it. And it's like, you can't help yourself what you're doing. So I'm kind of like playing with those elements. Like I'm okay with, some intentional performative elements, but it definitely started just being lost in the music and just wanting to feel it, and like feeling like, oh man, a show is not even a show unless I'm sweating my ass off. And it's like, I'm going to give you everything I fucking have, okay, in these like 25 minutes, because I know, not that I want to cater to people's terrible attention spans, but it's like I am aware that like this is this very contained moment where we're all here, and people have layers of muck. I do too, of just like been there, done that, seen that. And it's just like, I'm trying to wake you up, but I'm also trying to wake me up, and let's be woken up together. So, I mean, I think people really appreciate, even if they don't even necessarily even like how I sound. I think many people just appreciate how much I give to a live performance, because I do. I give 200% in every live performance.
So how do you recover from that? I mean, if you're on tour and you're doing this nightly, how do you have like a routine?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because the work is getting more and more physically demanding. So those needs are becoming more and more specific, and I'm getting older and those needs become more specific. I mean, I actually just came from a tour this winter where I was over there all of November and part of December, and I was sick for more than half of it, and it was terrible. But I think that was for deeper reasons, but also, I'm constantly trying to refigure like what's the best and safest way for me to go and do this thing. And I learned some things from that tour. I mean, I never play one night. I can't do that. I won't do that. I'm not interested. I will always have at least a day off between every show, if not two. So when I talk to a promoter, I'm always like, I need a hotel room 2 nights. Oh, that's like definitely part of the equation. But it's true. I do think that experimental music, doesn't quite have that respect for musicians who really come from more of like a physically engaged sort of approach, because it is a really demanding thing. And to do it day in, day out, you really need to have XYZ to like feel better. And I'm really thankful that hotel rooms have most hotel rooms have the electric kettles, so you can use that to like steam. And but yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
How do you go about practicing the approach that you have? Is it just through the act of performing? Are you working on developing a vocabulary? And as it comes back, as you do it more and more, you're like, oh, that's okay, I've got that thing, I'm going to do that thing.
Yeah. I think mostly the latter. I definitely am always working on expanding my vocabulary, but and like tools, tricks, whatever you want to call it. I feel like my work at this point has become very clearly sort of divided into two approaches. And one is my like solo shows, and the other is like improvisation with other people. And my solo shows have become incredibly blocked, incredibly composed. I mean, they're not like note for note for note for note. There's always, it's like blocks, as I say, of this idea, this idea, this idea, this idea. But the roadmap is locked in. And I want it that way. And I spent a lot of time composing that. The flow to a live show to me is crucial and important. I spent a lot of time on that. And then that leads into like my solo recordings, which are also incredibly composed and well thought out and elaborately, arranged. Whereas then then the improvisational part of it is then I take perhaps some of these, as you said, vocabularies that I've created for my solo stuff, certain effects or certain microphone techniques, or certain flute stylings or whatever. And then I'll just use them in like without any sort of roadmap. And how I pull them and when I pull them and if I pull them is just a total wild card. And I've grown to really, really, really appreciate that approach as well, which then will sometimes lead to a new trick or technique that then I would then perhaps hone in the solo set. But I find that the two approaches are so important to me. Like, I think it's important. I have a strong desire, need, or whatever to compose and control. But then I also have this huge desire to, not be in control or allow things to not be in control. I think they're both really important for my practice. And I think the thing why some people are unclear on that is because with my live performances, I try to maintain a certain level of like what seems to be something very like free and not controlled, but it's actually it's been quite, honed. But I don't know if that makes sense, but
has your approach to improvisation changed over time?
yeah, for sure. I mean, my tools have just changed. My vocabulary has changed. I do a lot more with electronics now, a lot more with like Ableton processing, a lot more just gotten way more skilled at like electronics and certain types of like processing.
And has there like, when you've changed or developed things and sort of I get not necessarily started a new chapter in that, but like there's been a clear evolution in some capacity. Like, is that because of something happening, like a pivotal moment or a person or playing with certain people that have changed that? Or is that just like you sitting and reflecting on how things have been going? Or is it just like an organic evolution? Or a
In
little bit
terms
of
of
all
like
of those?
how I've been led towards these new vocabularies or whatever.
Yeah.
That's what you're asking. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I mean, again, persisting in my folly for so many years, and like one thing leading to another, and one rabbit hole leading to another rabbit hole, and absolutely meeting someone who kind of tips me off in a certain way. I don't even know if I could even begin to name, because there's been so many influences, and it's like, oh, I want to mess around more like with that. I want to mess around more with that, and then finding like, just certain technologies or certain instruments that like make me go off into another rabbit hole. I mean, I think that one of the big inspirations for me recently has been which I was like, I'm trying to destroy music, which is kind of dramatic, but is that I started to really have a sort of like negative attitude about gear, and like how music is so heavily uh or a lot of music, I shouldn't say all music, but a lot of electronic music and a lot of, you know, current music today is very gear driven. And it's like people want to see the, you know, you perform at the gear table and what's on the table and what do I need to buy next, and like it can turn into such a consumery thing. And I've always just wanted to somehow get as far away from that as I could, but still like, you know, was in love with certain technologies that I wanted to use. And so it's like whenever I'm setting up before a show, I'm like, um, I do have a small little table with my computer and mixer and interface, and sometimes some pedals, and sometimes a synthesizer, but I always have it like way over on the side that I only come to a few times because I always like automate everything. So I don't have to go to the table. I'm not behind the table. And so it's like, I want it to be about the sound and my body. And I don't want anything else in the way, which is why I've really become very interested in Ableton. And perhaps that might lead to more like Maximus P and things where you know, you can automate stuff and not have to keep pushing buttons and things like this. And I also kind of also wanted to create a world where it almost seemed like people just didn't know how you were doing that. Like it almost seemed like magic. Why I would hit the microphone 1 second and the next minute it would be a totally different sound, and then it would shift throughout, you know, a 25-minute performance or whatever. And so I think that's also why I was feeling more interested in music as performance or sound in performance, is because also like the commercial aspect of like a recording is just like, I'm just also like feel there's so many albums that come out, like, do we really need another album? Yes, we do. And obviously I'm being cynical. I love music and I love records and I'm working on a record now, but it's just, there's so many recordings. So it's like, to me, it's the fucking performance that's the most powerful thing right now. And you know, and it can't be, I mean, even though I guess performances are now being bought by museums for X amount of money, but technically it's still not a commodifiable thing. I mean, well, you get paid to perform, but it's still like, you can't buy my performance, you know, and own it or something. It's a special experience, you know, that's in this time and in this space and in this culture or whatever. It just seems like such an important thing. So that was sort of like a tangent. I just and I think it's because I've also been, you know, doing this for so many years that I just, and there's no rules. I can still totally appreciate like Bill Orcutt up there shredding on his guitar. Like, no, I'm not like dissing anyone who just goes up there with an instrument at all. It's just, I think for me, it became more than just me up there playing an instrument. It became more of an interdisciplinary sort of performance thing.
I want to go back and talk a little bit more about the physicality in your work. And I'm curious, aside from using the microphone and just performance elements, have you found ways that you can incorporate that physicality into other instruments that you play or you're developing? Or have you gotten into any sort of motion responsive technology
Right.
to create some sounds with that movement?
Cool. Yeah. Those are things that are like sort of in the works right now. I mean, I think there's like a careful line I always want to draw about like things getting too gimmicky or something like this, or like Disney World, whatever. But but yes, I do have currently a couple things that I'm working on that are like, yeah, like a little ring where you can move your hand and that will like, you know, modulate certain things of the sound. And it's definitely something I'm wanting to explore more in the next, you know, in the future. And I'm just at the kind of at the very beginning of that right now. Mm-hmm. Mhm.
When you are collaborating with people, like how do you, for longer term collaborations, what characteristics are you looking for in a collaborator?
Cool. Yeah. Well, yes. So this kind of goes back into the microphonist thing. I recently have really been enjoying most, and there's no rules. There's no rules because sometimes, you know, something will work and you don't, it's not a formula. But I really like playing with musicians primarily who, um, like just, it's like them and their instrument, like a stand-up bass or a violinist or um, a saxophonist or a drummer. And then I, along with all my like vocal antics and movement based practice, will every now and then and I always ask permission. I always ask permission, but I will use my, it's seemingly at times kind of chaotic electronics, but they actually are pretty under control. And I will, actually come up to them and microphonist their sound. So I tend to like really playing with instruments that are just kind of like not with a whole lot of effects, just like a clean sounding instrument, a raw sounding instrument that then I can sort of process and go in and out with. And so it creates a really like dynamic, interactive experience, and believe it or not, everyone I've asked has been like, yeah, go for it. Like, I'm not so sure I would be like, I don't know what you're going to do to me, but everyone has been totally into it and they really enjoy it. And so far that angle has been working. It's not always the angle. I really love playing with drummers a lot. That just creating that like extra energy and rhythm along with my sort of breathy sounds and my flute punctuations. It's the best. It's probably, if I had to pick one thing, I would say drums. But I love it. There's no formula. There's no formula. It's more about the energy in the room at that time and where it goes. And it's such a cool and mysterious process, just not knowing where it exactly will go, but it's like you are in it and you believe in it, you believe in the group, and it always takes you, and it's become at this point in my career like nothing but pure joy. Thank the fucking gods. It's just because it's just joy.
Was it something other than that before?
Well, as I said, when I first started playing music, performing was very stressful for me. And I would get very nervous and just was like, why do I do this to myself?
Was it that way when you were in middle school and high school band playing flute as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, that's a thing. People have like terrible connotations with music because of that approach. I mean, when I was a kid, I would get really grumpy about piano lessons and having to go to band like during school. I would be really grumpy about it sometimes. And yeah, the piano recitals, come on. Those are just terrible. Sweaty fingers.
They need more microphones.
Do you think if you had been introduced to improvisation earlier, that would have
God, I have
helped you
no, I mean,
sooner?
that's wild. I don't even know. I mean, I don't think as a kid yeah, if I had grown up in New York City with two autistic parents, like I have no idea what I'd be doing. I'd be like probably into classical music or something. I don't know. But yeah, that I don't think I even knew improvisation existed when I was a kid. I don't even, I think I knew stand-up existed, like maybe like comedy improv or something. That seems scary. That seemed incredibly hard.
You've talked a little bit about your solo act in particular is really thoroughly composed or devised, do you also compose or devise music for other people where you're not engaged in performing it?
Yeah, I have. Um, that is, I mean, I think maybe I've only done that in a extremely, I've only maybe done that 3 times, I think, for 3 different pieces. So that's something I haven't done a lot. Um, I am working currently like on a recording right now where I am getting, I think it was partly because I was so isolated the last few years because of COVID and some other stuff, that like coming back to the city was like really important for me to like get back in touch with the community. And so on this new record, I have a kind of a big vision for it. And so I am bringing in um, strings and trumpet and drums and saxophone, and those directions, depending on what part it is, are they are directional, but they aren't like note for note. Again, I come from a folkloric background, so currently I'm not writing notation unless it's some kind of like, I have done a little bit with graphic notation. Um, but the two, yeah, I think there was like 3 things where a couple commissioned pieces for roulette where I worked with some string players and a drummer, in sort of smaller groups of musicians, where again, it was more of a descriptive, visual kind of thing that I wanted from them, not a note for note, or a very simple thing like certain long tones that I wanted from them. So this is an aspect of my work that I am curious to experiment more with. It's it's a process that I feel like will be an individual one for me, and um, trying to figure out the best way to notate that and communicate with larger groups of musicians is something that I'm still trying to wrap my head around, and the most effective ways of doing that. Um, but again, it kind of goes back into that like formal music thing where it's like, something that I'm still like sort of kind of trying to re redesign for myself. And I don't, I have like a resistance towards like music stands and silly things like that, I mean, so whatever. But yeah, it's something I want to work more with. Thank you.
What else are you working on currently?
Well, yes, as I said, I've been really honed in on this particular record, and it's very, 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 very close. And so it'll be my uh it'll come out through the Revenge label here in New York, hopefully in 20, maybe late 2023, probably 2024. But that's been like my main focus since I've been back in the city. And then that interspersing that with a lot of improvisational gigs. So I once this album is over and kind of done, I think that's when I will, one, with much more determination and focus, start exploring the sound reactive kind of electronics that I have at my disposal, and has sort of been slowly getting into that, as well as conceptualizing a bigger piece with perhaps more collaborators. Um, so that's the idea.
Thanks so much for chatting with us today.
Cool.
Yeah,
Well,
this is
thank you
so
for
great.
having us, or me, us, they.